I welcome you to this next session on sustainable mobility, innovation and integration. The session will explore the evolving mobility landscape and the integration of new transport modes to build an efficient, sustainable and interconnected system. Key challenges include congestion, safety and infrastructure gaps. With a shift towards blended fuels across sectors and the development of digital infrastructure, the focus is on reducing logistics, costs, and building a sustainable mobility world for tomorrow. Please join me in welcoming our dignitaries onto the dais. Mr. R. Dinesh, immediate past President CII and Executive Vice Chairman TVS Supply Chain Solutions. Mr. Tarun Soni, Co-Chairman CII Committee on Bioenergy and Vice Chairman Triveni Engineering. Ms. Shraddha Suri Marva, President, the Automobiles Component Manufacturers Association and Chairman and Managing Director, Subros. Mr. Salil Gupte, Chairman CII Committee on Aerospace and President, Boeing, India and South Asia. Mr. Kamal Bali, President and Managing Director, Volvo India Group. And Mr. Loknath Behra, Managing Director, Kochi Metro. May I request Mr. Dinesh to please deliver his opening remarks.
Friends and colleagues on the dais, friends and colleagues in the audience, after the lunch, and hope that we can keep you interested and awake during the course of this discussion. I think all of us are first network. And as we look at various options and various solutions, it is not just about transforming, but making sure that we transform as we integrate. And that's why we have a very interesting panel here with us today, which will cover different facets of the theme of mobility, and how do we really look at what is the low-hanging fruits which we can move forward to implement and see the benefits of, not just in India, but also build solutions which can be replicable elsewhere. As we all experience every day, whether it be people movement or in goods movement, the kind of congestion that we have, and I would call it lack of connected infrastructure, which enables us get the first mile established, is not just an urban planner's nightmare, but is also, I would call it, every player in the mobility sector solution have to be thought of and built from. This is not something which we can point our fingers at the government to do. It is something we have to work closely with the government to make happen. And that's the reason why we are adopting this as a thought process initiative as well as an implementation initiative. It's also that all these changes which are taking place in the sector is not just going to impact the different modes of transport, but is going to impact millions of people employed in each of these facets and each of these supporting activities. There are so many MSMEs, there are garages, there are retailers, there are service mechanics, there are people who are self-employed which support the mass movement of people in different facets, starting from two-wheeler, going all the way up to the planes. And maybe we will do that a little bit later. CII Coalition on Future Mobility, and this will be constituted as an apex body which will be within CII working in aligning the various efforts, starting from urban planning all the way into the different aspects of mobility which we will cover. And I would suggest that we start the discussions and then come back to the launch soon. With that, we have all the panelists with us, and let me now start by requesting Tarun Soni to start with his comments, and you can feel free to remain seated or use the dais, up to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to speak to you a little bit more about the future of mobility. I'd like to focus my comments really speaking about the ethanol journey. I think we've made some remarkable achievements. The nation has achieved 20% ethanol blending in the month of April 2025, a full 11 months ahead of the Honorable Prime Minister's agenda. That's an enormous achievement for the country and a huge milestone. India's mobility solution, it's not either or. It's actually both ethanol and EVs in my perspective. Ethanol offers an immediate, inclusive, and scalable solution, especially in rural areas and in freight sectors. And I'm sure my colleagues on the dais will be talking about the prospects of EVs as well. But I feel that these two are complementary. Now, we've achieved a remarkable amount. The oil marketing companies will be procuring approximately 1,000 crore liters of ethanol in this supply year. That equates to about 60,000 crores. And that is the kind of foreign exchange that our nation has managed to conserve in this transition. And let's not forget that the greatest beneficiary of E20 is the Indian farmer. Security of farm produce, the collection of the farm produce, the changes that are happening in the supply chain, especially for fuel crops. And maize, of course, there's been a lot of conversation about it. Yesterday, the central government announced an increase in the MSP of prices, including maize. And so it's obviously something that has keen attention. The Honorable Prime Minister, in his Independence Day speech last year, launched 2 new maize varieties after a long period of time. And the hope, of course, is that we achieve higher yields in the country, bring more prosperity to rural India and to farm India, and help the consumer of the ethanol at the same point in time. Now, looking forward, I think there's a lot that needs to be accomplished. You know, E20 was just a small part of the journey. I won't spend time in my opening remarks talking about the future, but I would like to say that it is very bright. It is a participation not just of the farm economy, but by processors, a 60,000 crore industry that has been set up in record time, and an industry that has the prospects to grow well beyond 1 lakh crores by the end of this decade. That should be our mantra. How do we make it more inclusive? How do we bring capital, both domestic and international, into the ecosystem? How do we improve efficiencies? How do we set possibly our own standards for the world? India has a knack of finding truly unique solutions, and in this sector of mobility, and the contribution that ethanol will play in this very important sector, I think that is going to be something that we can all look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarun. Can I now move to Salil?
Good afternoon. I want to start with provocation. Think back to every single time that you are in the queue for an airplane flight. And think about the person at the front of that queue who may not have their Aadhaar card or identification ready when they reach the front. You might feel frustrated in that moment. And yet it reminds you of the promise of India and the promise of Indian aviation. Because you're then reminded that on every single flight that you take, a flight that you might take for granted, that you might even view as an inconvenience, somebody is experiencing that flight for the very first time in their lives. That is the magic and the opportunity of this nation. That is why over the next 20 years, there will be 2,500 civil aircraft that will be coming to India. You'll go from 2% to 10% to 20%, and then eventually every single Indian being able to fly. over the next 20 to 25 years. And yet, we sit here today and we think about the implications of that from a sustainability standpoint, from a sustainable mobility standpoint. Because today, globally, aviation accounts for about 2% of total carbon footprint, carbon emissions. In India, it's a bit higher, it's about 3 to 4%. By the end of the 20-year period, as you get to into the mid-2040s, you will be at about 10% for aviation out of the total carbon footprint of India, which is very, very substantial. And that is because aviation is very, very difficult to decarbonize. Purely from a physics standpoint, the energy density of Jet A, or jet fuel, air turbine fuel as it's called in India, is just a far superior technical solution to the alternatives today, or at least the affordable alternatives today. And so as we move to those alternatives, there are going to need to be breakthroughs in technology, breakthroughs in scale, and ultimately government incentives to help prime the pump, pun intended, to move us down the road to more sustainable aviation. Our social license, to a certain extent, to travel depends on our working together to achieve that. And so we'll talk a little bit today about some of those things, sustainable aviation fuels, we'll talk about new technologies. But as you look at the road to decarbonization, there are a few things in aviation that can be done. One, India is way ahead of the game, is having a newer fleet, a younger fleet. India has ordered over 1,000 airplanes over the last couple of years alone. Over the next 5 to 10 years, India will have one of the younger fleets in the world. So you can tick that box. India will have done that. Second, there is operational changes, incorporating software that guides you where to fly, how to fly less against the wind, single-engine taxis on the ground, using things like TaxiBot to tow the airplane out without using engines on the ground. Operational improvements, those can get you some of the way as well. As you look at the path to decarbonization, operational improvements will get you maybe 10, 11% improvement. New technologies going onto the airplane, lighter carbon frames, things like that will get you another 20%. Electric and hydrogen, which we'll talk about, will get you maybe 6 or 7%. The rest is sustainable aviation fuel. And that's why we focus so much on that. That's why we're going to spend some time talking about how India can play a role in the industrialization of biofuels for aviation or sustainable aviation fuels on the road to future technologies like hydrogen and electrification. That's what's going to be required to achieve sustainable mobility in aviation. That's what's going to be required for this industry to achieve its net zero 2050 goals.
Thank you, Salil. So can I now move to Shraddha Suri Marwa, who is the president of Automobile Component Manufacturers Association, to give her perspective of how the mobility is going.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the automotive landscape in the world of mobility that we're living, and EV and its, fast inroads into our sector. But before I start, let me give you a couple of facts. Passenger vehicles, we produced and sold about 5 million last year. Only 100,000 were BEVs, or battery electric vehicles. We produced about 24 million two-wheelers, and 1 million were BEVs. And we made about 1 million commercial vehicles, and a few thousand were BEVs. One area that we did actually do well was in the three-wheeler space, where out of the 1 million that we produced, about 40% were battery electric vehicles. So what I'm trying to say is that the volumes of EVs compared to the total pie still are slow, but it's fast changing, no doubt, and we have to move towards the 40% mark by 2030. To do that, I think there are a couple of things that we need to do, and they stand right in front of us. We first need to work on localization of the EV subsystem, especially areas of battery management, power electronics. I think R&D is critical. All tier ones need to actually get into product development either by themselves or by buying technology or by tying up with startups, because if we design, then we will localize. Investment in advanced manufacturing as EVs develop is absolutely important, and these largely will be in the area of tooling, automation of lines and automation of quality systems, because products are going to be more sensitive. Skill development, I think this is one challenge that our sector really faces, because we need to upskill, we need to reskill, especially in the areas of machine learning, or also in areas of embedded software. And the PLI schemes, of course, we have the schemes right now for chemical batteries and for auto components, and we hope they remain stable and get rolled out as planned. There are certain things that we must be cognizant about in this space, and that is that we do face challenges of rare earth as we speak today. There is this upcoming challenge of lithium-ion being banned. So we need to be aware of that as we invest in the space. But I do think that a meaningful reduction in import dependency, particularly in the high value EV components, may begin to materialize in the next 3 to 5 years, provided supply chains remain steady and government policy sort of remains stable. So I think there are enough and more opportunities, and there are challenges. But we do believe that the mobility landscape, of course, is going through a huge transformation, and EV is going to be a big part of that story. So I'll end there, and then I'll wait for the discussion to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Shraddha, for that opening remarks. Can I now move to Kamal Bali, President Managing Director of Volvo?
Hi, thank you, Dinesh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say that mobility sector, or the transport and mobility sector, is seen as probably the last bastion of change. We've seen so many changes coming in various other sectors of our economy, whether it is the fintech world, whether it is a digital transformation in many other areas. But I think our industry is going through once in a lifetime transformation in my view. Let's put in context what are really the challenges and imperatives for mobility sector. I think very, very clearly the growing demands on mobility will grow, because as India's economy grows, the demands on mobility will further accentuate. That's the first one. Number two, safety conundrum. India is the road capital accidents in the world. How do we really manage the safety part? That's the second. Number three, congested cities, making them inefficient and dysfunctional many times. Number four, resource depletion. Shraddha just talked about resources, rare earth, and so many other challenges. Resource depletion with more use of energy. Number five, high logistics cost. Our logistics cost is about 14 to 15% of our GDP versus maybe 8 to 9% in the developed world. So it's fairly high. High greenhouse gas emissions, which lead to climate change incidents and many other challenges. And finally, dependence on energy imports. So mobility has these kind of challenges all around. So therefore, all this, if you notice, will require a unified action and governance at city level, with transport, highways, renewable energy, environment factors, power, oil and gas, and the whole industry together. So clearly, being an ecosystem-wide change, partnership is going to be the key. There's no one actor who can fix all the problems of mobility. Mobility is a highly ecosystem-wide subject, and it will need to really look at partnership in a big way, collaboration and partnership in a big way. Also, we need to really immediately ensure that our tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 cities do not follow the mega cities. I think we need to fix them right now, and that's going to be the key, because greenfield is much easier to fix. So therefore, to sort out some of these challenges which I talked about, what do we need? We need smart mobility, which is interconnected intelligent systems. Today it is possible because you're armed with huge technology on automation, connectivity, digitalization, including advanced sensors and perception equipment. So I think one is getting into that mode, load and route optimization, matching passenger demand versus public transport deployment, integration of multimodal transport, interoperability of all of those. So I think integration, planning of infrastructure for the cities and otherwise. So that's one. Reducing congestion, that's the next point. How do we do that? So congestion doesn't happen because there are too many vehicles. Congestion happens because there are too many people at the same time for the same purpose in the same area. So I think we need to do a little bit of urban planning in a better way based on the use of the of various facilities and utilities people want. Then of course safety, and I think this is again a systems approach because it's a function of the vehicle, the driver, the road users, infrastructure and traffic management. So there is a concept called Vision Zero in Sweden, which is a concept which we are trying to bring to India as well. We are working very hard on it, and this can be very, very, I would say, a good approach to solving some of the safety issues which we are. The next one is zero and low emissions. I think we've talked about it. I think India is following the right ways. There are three basic ways. One is battery electric, the other is fuel cell electric, the third one is H2, ICE or IC engine using cleaner fuel. So there are three approaches, and I think we will have to invest in all three. All three will have different purpose for different modes of transport, and I think that's going to be the right path. And finally, logistics efficiencies, and I think Dinesh can talk about that much more. And logistics efficiencies, how connectivity, how connecting the entire ecosystem will play a very big role. So I stop here. I'll wait for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal. And finally, and most important, we have Mr. Loknath Behra, the Managing Director of Kochi Metro. And before you speak, sir, I think we should congratulate you on not just the successful launch of the Kochi Metro, but also coining the new term of the water metro in Kochi. So congratulations, and go ahead, please.
Thank you, Dinesh sir, and my esteemed co-panelists and friends. I actually say that though I don't belong to Kochi, I love that city because it is having a population of 3 million only, altogether all the suburbs put together. But trust me, 27% of the city's area is water, and all kind of water. Backwaters, sea, you have mangroves, you have canals, everything. And once upon a time, it was the most important thing for Kochi when it evolved, the water transport. So this year, when the Government of India actually recognized Kochi city as the best sustainable public transport city in the country, I was feeling that anyway, the Kochi Metro and Water Metro has actually contributed quite a lot. That was there in the citation, that how we did it. You know, some people from Delhi, when the Water Metro was launched, they were asking whether the metro goes inside the water. I said, no, it's not going on inside the water. It is actually the electric ferries, very, very well designed. And we should be very proud of as being Indians, because we got the best boat, the passenger boat in the world. And I got the award from Paris. So that is the kind of thing which is being made in Cochin shipyard, and it is done fully Indian. So what we actually did, because I will be waiting for Dinesh sir's questions, what we did is that all the public mode of transport, whether it is metro rail or the water metro or the feeder systems which we run, electric buses and electric autos, that all run by the KMRL, they are all integrated digitally. So you have no cash is required if you are very techno savvy. You just download the app and then you buy the tickets. There will be, say, 4 QR codes. One for metro, another for the water metro, one other for the feeder bus or another for the auto rickshaw. Then they get merged. And you can use your phone for making a payment and go from one place to the other. What I am actually telling today also, I was telling Dinesh one particular thing, why not we actually think of a situation in Delhi or other places, the ease of payment, so that is the most important thing for a person, that why should I go and stand in a queue to buy a ticket? Can I actually plan my thing in what we do in the morning, or I want to go to my office, then to hospital, to my mother's place or something, and do this particular planning and get it actually digitally made so that without any hassle I can reach, the ease of travel. So he asked me what is future. I said, sir, it is account-based ticketing has to come. Though there are a lot of actually work going on that. Like in London you go, you have to actually use either a debit card or a credit card. That is enough for actually going to any AFC gate or any payment anywhere. So that can also be done, and we should work. CII has a very important role in that, to bring in that kind of technology, which I actually, when I went to Singapore recently, 2 weeks back, I was in Barcelona. They are having this. Barcelona has a population of only 3 millions, but they have all these kind of things. They run 44 hydrogen buses. Trust me, what they have said when they were giving the presentation, the university and other people, their authority, I asked that, look, the green hydrogen is expensive. So how do you actually manage whether you are actually loading it on the people? They said, no. The government is actually ensuring that even if you travel in the hydrogen powered buses, the fare is the same. It is loading the government. But he said, in 5 years' time, it will be all right. Now in Kochi, which is a very good thing which has happened, we are now going to, in a month's time, we are going to inaugurate the green hydrogen producing plant and factory in the Cochin airport, which is actually again 100% powered by solar power. So this kind of thing, sustainability is important. Being actually a cop all throughout my life, I actually worked in the IPS for 36 years. I was actually tempted to actually say something what my predecessor spoke about decongestion and other things. Sir, it is a very difficult job. As a police officer, I can say we always talk about how to decongest and reduce the accidents, but we are not able to do it. And every year the data is, this is increasing. So a very, very well thought of plan has to come to do it, and you can play a very important role. I'll wait for the question from Dinesh sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we'll move to the panel discussion. So Tarun, if I can start with you. So obviously you did mention about the ability for blending and what we can do. How do you, and as a concept, obviously we don't believe that the future is going to be all about only electric mobility. It is going to be a combination of many other fuels and many other solutions which we are looking at. So in your view, how do you see the future evolving, say between 2030 to 35? And you also raised this point of funding, so maybe it will be good to get your thoughts on how you expect that to happen.
Sure. Thanks, Dinesh. Great question. I think the future is very bright. Now, if we look at first generation technologies, we've achieved 1,000 crore liters. There's already an inter-ministerial committee that's been set up by the central government to evaluate what after E20. What should the nation do? What should we produce? Because the backstop always is the Indian farmer. The advent of this, the fact that, that this became mandated was to support the Indian farmer. Of course, the other ecosystems that grew around it was an important contributor, and it, of course, helped the environment and the consumer. So what next? If we look around us, and we have in some respects followed the Brazilian model. So Brazil has migrated from E26 to E27 to E30 earlier this year. If we follow suit, we're looking at another 770 crore liters of ethanol, first generation capacity addition. That's fairly substantial. We need to look at where the supplies come from. When this campaign started 15 years ago, we looked at only sugarcane as the input to manufacturing ethanol. We've soon moved, and more than 50% of the ethanol produced in the country comes from grain. earlier from rice and now from maize. There is talk now of looking at other cash crops like sweet sorghum, etc. That can be very important contributors not just to farm income, but as an input to distilleries to manufacture ethanol. So that's the first thing. Incentivization I'll cover as the second point. There are enormous possibilities for second generation and third generation technologies. So second generation ethanol again is a technology that is commercially available the world over. There's been a lot of progress in Brazil. Clearly there are incentives that are required because it does come at a higher price point. However, from a carbon offset perspective, it really does accomplish everything that you're after. We in the industry believe that this is the very next thing. There's a lot of work that's happened on the technology side, so we don't have any concerns in terms of technology, but it is really about the allocation of capital and then the offtake by the oil marketing companies, etc. And then my colleague on the dais mentioned sustainable aviation fuel. There are a whole host of third generation technologies. Again, India, we're blessed with ethanol infrastructure. There is no reason why we can't use existing technologies like alcohol to jet, just as an example, to be able to foster a sustainable aviation system. I mean, India is a signatory to COSIA, we've got mandates, etc. But why doesn't it happen, and what will it take for this to happen? That is your second question, and for that, we of course need demand and supply side initiatives. So we need flex fuel vehicles to be manufactured. Science talked about it by the end of this fiscal year. We need incentives, perhaps a GST reduction to 5% for FFVs. That could be very exciting. We need E100 hydrous ethanol retail solutions. There are only 400 pumps across the country that have E100. There are 17,400 pumps that have E20. So, we need that gap to be bridged. And then we need capital to come in for production. And that will only happen if the pricing is attractive. Because you can't, if your feedstock is agricultural produce and you keep raising the MSP, you have to raise the price of ethanol, otherwise it will become very unattractive for further capital allocation.
Good point. So it's both a commercial link and an incentivization which have to work together hand in hand. So Salil, I'm just going to move to you because it's a follow-up question on the same. You did mention about SAF and how you see the evolution. Today, what percentage approximately is happening globally and in the Indian context, and how do you see that going forward in the future? And also the second part of the question is, do you see other new technologies like, I don't know, green hydrogen coming into the aviation side?
Yeah, it's definitely an opportunity. If you look around the world, about 50 airlines have already started using sustainable aviation fuel regularly in their operations. Some airlines like Lufthansa, if you go buy a ticket on their website, when checking out and paying, you'll actually get the opportunity to click on a green fuel element and pay a little bit extra in order to ensure that a certain amount of sustainable aviation fuel credit is given for the particular ticket that you're buying. So those types of things are in play right now. On the airplane side, depending on what type of sustainable aviation fuel you're using, you can blend between 5 and 50%, depending on what they're called pathways, how you're making the sustainable aviation fuel. Alcohol to jet was one that Tarun just mentioned. We'll talk about that. And then by 2030, it is Boeing's stated goal that every single airplane that we make can be flown on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. I say all that to point out that the holdup, the barrier, is not going to be the airplane technology. It's not going to be the engine technology. The airplanes will be able to handle it in a few years. That's fine. The challenge is going to be the supply factor, what was just mentioned, in terms of how is sustainable aviation fuel available and how is it available economically. If you look at the price of air turbine fuel, or Jet A as it's known throughout much of the world, in the last few weeks it trades about 85 rupees per liter. Sustainable aviation fuel is maybe 2.5 to 3.5 times that price today. Now you can imagine in a competitive market like India, where aviation fuel takes up upwards of 40 to 45% of the budget of an airline, why this is a problem. as aviation tries to grow. The margins are already incredibly thin in Indian aviation. This would not help. So what is it going to take to get us towards the goal of net zero in India? Well, it's going to take incentives, it's going to take scale, right? The more you are able to make and prime the pump and make it higher volumes, eventually the cost comes down. But let me just tell you what those volumes look like. The world, in order to reach its net zero by 2050 goals for aviation, is going to have 185 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel per year. This is in 2050. India's feedstock, so whether it's used cooking oil, whether it's agricultural waste, or the like, has the ability within the next 15 or so years to be able to make 8 to 10 million tons of fuel. Now this means that India can actually provide over 5% of the world's fuel requirements, which is actually a little bit above of what India's share of the global fleet will be in that 2,500 airplanes I mentioned over the next 20 years, which means India can be a net exporter of sustainable aviation fuel. This creates an opportunity. This means that India can not only help decarbonize its own aviation industry, but as a matter of industrial policy, India can increase the exports of the essentially petroleum industry by moving more aggressively into sustainable aviation fuel. But the prime feedstock is going to also have to evolve, because right now most sustainable aviation fuel around the world, and especially in India, uses used cooking oil. The reverse supply chain for used cooking oil, while there's a lot of it in India, is just not going to be good enough to make most sustainable aviation fuel out of used cooking oil. It's primarily going to have to be made from agricultural waste, which we also have a lot of. Anyone who lives in Delhi in the north in November, December sees this and breathes this every day. And so turning that agricultural waste into sustainable aviation fuel is a tremendous opportunity. Just last thing I just want to point out, hydrogen, you mentioned. Hydrogen is going to be part of the solution, but not anytime soon. Boeing has been working on hydrogen technologies for the last 10 years. Airbus had been working on it also the last 4 or 5 years. You might have read they put their efforts on pause for a while. There's a reason for that. The infrastructure for aviation, for hydrogen, and the sheer physics of a hydrogen plane in terms of the number of passengers it would carry versus how big the plane would have to be today just doesn't make sense. And it's going to be a decade or two before we are able to solve some of those problems on the tech side and the infrastructure side. By that point, it'll be too late to get to net zero by 2050. So it will be part of the solution in the future, but the current solution has to be primarily sustainable aviation fuel.
Thank you, Salil. Kamal, I'm just going to ask you to give your, I don't want to say contrarian, but different thinking in terms of the green hydrogen side, especially on the passenger vehicle movement, which I think your company has also been doing in certain parts of Europe.
So I will slightly disagree with Salil, at least on the trucking part. On medium to heavy duty, I think hydrogen is likely to make sense much earlier than probably for the aviation. And the good news is that there are many players who are participating in a government initiative where we are bringing in a truck which will move near Vijayawada area, and this will be a hydrogen powered vehicle. And the key is that hydrogen will be stored at 700 bars, very high pressure, and that's where the trick is, how it becomes very efficient. So we have brought in a truck. This will run for the next 2 years. We hope by the end of 2 to 3 years' time, this whole concept can be proven. Very clean fuel, very efficient, and if we can actually master this art of really using hydrogen at 700 bars, with the entire ecosystem which needs to be built, of course, of the filling system, and the vehicle, so it can run on the same IC engine, so which can be a very big breakthrough to my mind for all medium to heavy duty trucks as well as long haul transport, which can also avoid the need for charging stations for an electric vehicle at very frequent places. So I think this can be a very good development, but of course, we have to wait and watch. Still, couple of years to go before we can say.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, as I said, for also the hope that it can happen. So, Shraddha, how do you really see the component manufacturing industry evolving into you already mentioned about EV, but how do you see that becoming more and more self-sufficient in today's, so to say, fraught, fragile world economy? A, from an Indian context, and B, from a thought process, obviously, as Kamal was pointing out, the new technologies need not necessarily mean a complete change as you would in EV. So how do you see this evolving in the Indian context, and how do you see the component manufacturers working together to make that happen?
So as I had mentioned earlier, I said, localization is going to be key. But I do think right now that we do face certain challenges and some opportunities in this space, because consumer preferences are changing very, very fast. And, things like ADAS, connected infotainment, etc., are becoming the norm. So, some of the challenges that we face are the product life cycles becoming shorter. And that's because of the fast changing consumer preferences. And as they become shorter, what actually happens is that the differentiation comes based on technology. How loaded you are on these fast changing technologies. And the challenge that brings is that it becomes capital intensive, and the ROI sort of becomes uncertain because the product life cycle is shorter. But it's not all like doom and gloom. There's enough and more opportunity, I think, that exists in the market, and I do believe all those people in the component space which invest in technology and have a technology edge will stand to gain, because that's the only way to do it. You've got to own the technology. You can't just you can't be pillion on somebody else's technology. The aftermarket area is really expanding, because as we are becoming more feature loaded, there's more and more scope for upgrades in the secondary market. And of course, there are new areas of revenue that are coming up, which are largely subscription based or over the air, or etc., etc. Having said this, there are some risks. There are risks of cybersecurity that face us. There are risks of as the life cycle becomes shorter, there's a faster refresh on them. And of course, legacy branding and, the way we did things in the past will fast change. So I think the underlying thing under all of this is that how does the value chain, not just the tier ones, but the entire value chain gear up for this transformation as we look at multiple fuels and multiple features, in line with the customer preferences.
Actually, I'm just going to follow up the second question rather than wait and come back to you, because I think you raised two very important points.
Yeah.
So at the continuous speed, or the speed at which technology changes and the return which you spoke about, is always a challenge. But do you actually see that as an opportunity in the digital world, where we can build, so to say, multimodal connectivity, where, I'm just giving an example, you are moving from a car to a bus to a metro, you are actually having a singular solution built for the people side of it. Similarly, do you also see that happening on the good side, and how do you see yourself evolving, or India evolving into supporting the smaller companies to reach to that capability?
So, I mean, if I were to draw that parallel, which you just spoke about, the Indian auto component space is actually a sum of its entire value chain. So as the tier one's evolving to align to the OEs and the change in preferences, if our entire value chain doesn't, drive with us, there's going to be an absolute disaster. So it is upon us to see how we can actually invest in them. And I do think investing in some of us need to invest with them in technology and digitization, because the gap between us and them is larger. But if this aligns, if the entire value chain aligns, I think that we are more than ready.
Thank you. So moving to Mr. Behra. So I think the question I had for you is, you have done this great job of starting the water metro. I think primarily it's for people movement. my question is, as we look at the logistics landscape in India, goods movement becomes a very important aspect of it. Do you see this evolving into moving goods in at least places which are blessed with the water connectivity? A. And a follow-up to that is, do you see the success of this in Kochi being replicated in other areas, to start with for people and then later for goods?
Sir, actually, the first thing is that water metro we thought of actually for the islanders. You know the geography of Cochin, it is actually surrounded by 11 islands, and which are very highly populous. So, but what has happened is that in last 2 years, when we have 4 million people who have already traveled, which is actually beyond our expectation, I always say that it is just like going to a water metro is going to a Rajnikant movie, because you have to stand in queue to get a ticket. That kind of thing happens there, but still then people love, and those people who travel to Kochi, they definitely make it a point to actually travel in water metro. Then what has happened is that we have not thought of actually a goods movement. You have a very valid point, because the islanders' life will change the moment the goods you permit. Now it is not. Actually, as per our SOP, we are not allowing, except you can carry a bag or something. But sir, one other thing I wanted to tell the esteemed audience here, the government of India is now toying up with the idea of using the metros for freight movement. So DMRC has done a study which has now been communicated to all the metros. So they say that during the off-peak hours and beyond the metro operation time, move the things. And I was told the Amazon and other people, they are very, very keen. And we are also now into the fray. Probably we will be the first person to probably implement it, because there are a lot of response. It's a smaller city, so it can be easy. So freight movement has to come. Second part is that, sir, actually what you say is that sometime back, actually when the Honorable Prime Minister actually dedicated this water metro to the nation, he actually in his speech said that why not you think about other places where it can be replicated. And lo and behold, this actually took 1.5 years' time. Now the government of India wants that it should be replicated in 21 locations, starting from Mumbai. I am so happy about Mumbai, because it will be a great boon. And what I say that the sad part is that we will be losing the exclusivity in Cochin, but it will be there for India. After all, so the places of 14 states, starting from J&K to UP to Bihar, even every other places where there is actually navigable water, we have been asked to actually implement the scheme. So we are now doing the feasibility. We have already done the feasibility of almost around 8 places, so have already completed. And that will be a game changer. It will decongest the roads. For example, it is one of the very good methods, for example, in a city like Mumbai. So you can actually reach from Kolaba to a particular Malad and things very quickly. So that is the part. But then, sir, what happens is that whether we will still stick to the LTO batteries, which is very expensive. Though it is a super battery and it charges the entire boat, 100 passenger boat, in 15 minutes time. By the time you get into the boat is charged. But now we have already developed, Cochin Shipyard has already developed the hydrogen boat. Probably we will have to go to that particular thing, which will be cheaper over the period of time and more efficient. So that is what we are now planning. But I will take this point from this conference, that how do we actually do freight movement in the water.
Thank you. Appreciate that, sir. I'll just finish the second question with you. We have little time, so quick answer from you. How do you look at the last mile and first mile connectivity for the metro, both the rail and the water?
So what happens is that the last mile connectivity is under my control to some extent. When somebody actually reaches the station, at least there are bicycles we are providing. We have actually the feeder buses are also there. They are electric buses run by us only. We have not actually outsourced it. We have the electric autos also, where you can go in a shared basis without any legal hiccup. These are things we did, and that has actually paid dividend. The ridership increased to some extent. But as far as first mile connectivity is that, honest to you, we have done nothing. Because it is a little complex. But it can be done, as you have already actually made a very good sentence. You said that technology can be a game changer. Whether by using the actually a kind of technology, by putting a hailing app or something, and putting some kind of situation that if I want to go from my house to the office and I want to use the metro or water metro, whether I will get a cab, a particular transport mode to the, you have given, I will give the audience, it's a little bit of distraction, but Dinesh actually travels to, out of Chennai by using metro. He told me that you are using metro to go to the airport. So that is actually a kind of thing which is actually, I say that for the airport, this is your first mile connectivity, technically speaking. So similar things can be also thought of how to integrate it. Ultimate thing is that ease of travel. So how easily I can reach a particular place and how quickly, how effortlessly and without actually hassles of payment, etc. That is what every company is now doing. All the metro companies, all the service providers are doing. And I'm sure that technology will bring in. I'm very optimistic about that.
Thank you. Wish you all success in that. So, very quickly, Kamal, how do you see congestion actually being resolved? I know Mr. Behera has a very different view, but very quickly.
No, but it's a long answer. I'll keep it very short in the interest of time. I think very clearly, obviously, public transport has to be made the preferred choice in cities, very, very clearly. And this is possible only when it becomes attractive. Currently, if you look at 20% of the people owning cars occupy 80% of the city roads. So I think that's the real challenge. So we need to really change that by making public transport attractive, safer, predictable, on time. So all of those things can be done just like they have done in the metro, in the water metro, in Cochin. I think that is one. There is no substitute to that. Other is multimodal ways of transportation. Like as you rightly said, if we have this land water use, both for freight as well as for public transport, I think that can be something very good. And finally, the urban development, at least in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 towns, should be based on the nature of the use. Is it a residential area, work area, leisure area? It has to be designed according to that, so that we do not have this infrastructure problems at later point in time. We can't do much about our existing large cities, but at least it's still time for India to really focus on tier 2, tier 3 cities in a positive way.
Thank you, Kamal. So moving to you, Salil, the third dimension of people mobility and air mobility, so to say, how do you look at the vertical takeoff landing systems, and do you think it will be applicable only for emergency situations or for mobility itself?
I think there's a really interesting future for these electric air taxi type solutions. It may not start on the civil side. It may actually start on the military side, where you're using these vehicles to move equipment to the high Himalayas and those types of regions. But the passenger use case is very, very clear. Imagine going out to the front lawn here of the Taj Palace, getting into the air taxi, being at the airport in 5 minutes, and going to your gate in another 10, 15 minutes after that. It's almost like magic. But the reality is there's two problems that have to be solved. First is cost. These companies that are global air taxi companies, Joby, Archer, whatnot, have said that they want to match the price of Uber. When they say Uber, they don't mean Uber in India. They mean Uber in North America. They mean Uber to go from Manhattan to JFK Airport in an Uber Black, which costs about $100 US, right? The Indian market is not going to be able to pay that, or if you do, it's not going to be a very large total addressable market. So really the only way to get to market in India is using autonomy. In other words, electric air taxis that do not have pilots. And so Boeing's solution, called Whisk, is going straight to that. We're skipping the pilot part. And that's why we've been working with the DGCA and other global regulators on detect and avoid technology to be able to bring that offering to India and other markets and have it be more accessible, where it would not be if you did not have autonomy. The other thing that you're going to need is infrastructure. You're going to need to build vertiports because you can't just take off on any on the middle of the street. You're going to need to build vertiports around the cities, and you're going to need to have electric infrastructure because these things are going to charge very fast. They charge in about 15 minutes in order to go about a maximum range of 150 kilometers at 220 kilometers an hour. At least that's for our vehicle. So in order to generate that kind of power, you're going to have massive electrical infrastructure, ideally some renewable, but nonetheless, in different parts of the city. And that will have to come up over the next 10 years to make this technology viable.
Thank you. And finally, Tarun, do you think India is in a position to actually create, so to say, a global benchmark in terms of what I would call the blending and creating a model which can actually work across the board for, I would call it, the developing world?
I certainly think so, and I think it can happen in two phases. The first thing is we have numbers on our side. We're a very large country, very large population, and so we can do things by numbers before we set those benchmarks in terms of technology. I think there are three simple things that can happen almost instantly this year and hopefully latest by next year. The first one is adding infrastructure. So like what Salil mentioned, I think the dispensation of E100 hydrous ethanol across the nation, setting up that infrastructure is very easily done. There are enormous facilities. Distilleries are usually in the hinterland, and so it can lead to very easy creation of that infrastructure. The second is, and already been tested by a variety of IITs, etc., and meeting BS3, BS6 standards, is the introduction of ED5. So diesel, 5% blended diesel is something that can help massively for transportation and for all the vehicles that use buses, etc., that use diesel across the country. And third, I think incentives for flex fuel vehicles. That is an absolute must. It will help the journey, and it would help set benchmarks, etc. As a nation, I think we should first look at massive numbers, record-setting numbers in these three categories. And then we can set our own standards. Why E30? We can certainly look at higher blends, but that's a much broader conversation, requiring participation with all players in that ecosystem. The first three objects can be record-setting and can be done immediately.
At least you have given us hope that India will take the lead on this, so looking forward to that. I think finally we come to the conclusion of the session, but we are very happy that CII will now be launching the Mobility Coalition, and I would like to invite my co-chair Satyaka Maria to come and join us in this pleasant task of starting this. As I said, CII will play the coordinating role in building the new Mobility Coalition along with this.
May I request Mr. Dinesh, Mr. Arya to please launch the plaque. The CII Coalition on Future Mobility is a landmark initiative to shape the next era of sustainable, smart and inclusive mobility in India. We are honored to have with us today a distinguished gathering of industry leaders, policymakers, innovators and thought leaders who are collectively driving the transformation of India's mobility landscape. Thank you. Thank you so much. I will also take this opportunity to thank our distinguished panelists. With this, we come to the close of the session. May I request our moderator to please present our panelists with a token of our gratitude. May I request our panelists to please step forward for a photo opportunity, a group photograph? Thank you.